In the fall of 2018, a small police department in northern Montana released a strange report that quietly circulated online among paranormal forums. The report involved a series of emergency calls made from an abandoned farmhouse located nearly 20 miles outside the nearest town. What made the case disturbing was that the property had been vacant for over 12 years after the previous owners mysteriously disappeared. Late one evening, a dispatcher received a weak 911 call filled with static and heavy breathing. The caller never spoke clearly, but faint whispers could be heard repeating the same phrase over and over again. "He's still here." Officers initially assumed it was a prank, but the call was traced directly to the farmhouse landline, a phone that had supposedly been disconnected since 2006. When deputies arrived, the house looked exactly as it had for years. Broken windows, collapsing porch boards, and tall grass swallowing the yard. The porch light was on. According to property records, the house had not had electricity in over a decade. The front door was slightly open, gently creaking in the cold wind as if someone had just walked inside. Two deputies, Officer Mark Jensen and Officer Raul Ortega, stepped cautiously into the farmhouse while their body cameras recorded everything. The inside smelled strongly of dust and mold, like a place frozen in time. Furniture remained exactly where the old owners had left it years earlier, chairs pulled out from the dining table and dishes still resting in the sink. But something felt wrong. The officers noticed fresh muddy footprints across the wooden floor leading deeper into the house. The prints were small, almost child-sized, yet they were clearly recent. Mark quietly whispered into his radio, asking if anyone else had arrived on the property. Dispatch. Stairs sounded like slow footsteps, pacing back and forth above them. The strange part was that the upstairs floor had partially collapsed years earlier, making it impossible for anyone to walk there safely. Mark and Raul looked at each other silently, both realizing the same thing at the same time. Whatever was moving above them should not have been able to stand on that floor at all. Despite their instincts telling them to leave, the officers slowly climbed the staircase. Each step creaked loudly under their boots, echoing through the empty house. As they reached the second-floor landing, the pacing sound suddenly stopped. The hallway ahead of them was dark, except for a faint light flickering from the final room at the end. Raul quietly called out, announcing their presence, but no one responded. The muddy footprints continued down the hallway, ending directly at the open doorway of the lit room. Inside, they found something unsettling. An old rotary phone sat on the floor, its cord running through a hole drilled into the wall. Phone receiver hung slightly off the hook, swaying gently as if someone had just placed it there moments earlier. But what truly disturbed them was the sound coming from it. The receiver was playing the recorded audio of the 911 call they had just responded to. Static, breathing, and the whisper repeating. "He's still here." Mark checked the wiring, but the phone wasn't connected to any power source. The cord simply disappeared into the wall. While Mark examined the phone, Raul slowly scanned the rest of the room with his flashlight. The walls were covered with something strange. Dozens of old photographs pinned unevenly across the wallpaper. At first glance, they looked like normal family pictures. People standing in front of houses, smiling during holidays, sitting around dinner tables. But when Raul looked closer, he realized something disturbing. In every single photograph, the same tall, shadowy figure stood somewhere in the background. Sometimes it was behind a tree. Other times it stood in a doorway or reflected faintly in a mirror. The figure's face was never clear, but its shape was unmistakably human. Raul called Mark over, pointing the flashlight at the photos. As they looked through them, they noticed something even worse. The photographs were arranged in chronological order, and the most recent ones were taken only a few days earlier. The final photo showed the outside of the farmhouse at night. Through the front window, two figures could be seen. Inside the house, They were the
Wait, shine it down
officers
here.
themselves,
What is it? Oh my
standing in the living room
That's
just
us,
minutes
outside,
earlier.
minutes ago.
Suddenly,
Hey,
the
get a
body
load of
cameras
this.
captured a loud thud from somewhere downstairs. Both officers froze. Sounded like the front door slamming shut. Mark quickly
get a load of
radioed
this.
dispatch again.
Dispatch,
But the
this is
signal was
Unit
now
12. We're
filled
at the
with loud
location.
interference. A
Dispatch,
faint
you're
whisper
breaking up.
bled
Say
through.
again. Over.
The static
get a load of
repeating
this.
the same phrase they had
Dispatch,
heard
this is
before.
Unit 12. We're at the
Raoul
location.
moved
Over.
toward the staircase to
Dispatch, you're
check the
breaking up. Say
entrance.
again. Over.
But when he looked, figure partially hidden in the shadows. Its body was unnaturally thin and completely still. The flashlight beam barely revealed its outline, but the most disturbing detail was its height. The figure's head nearly touched the ceiling of the first floor. Raoul whispered to Mark not to move. For nearly 10 seconds, the figure simply stood there, motionless. Mark instinctively drew his weapon and shouted for the figure to identify itself. The moment he spoke, the hallway lights upstairs suddenly flickered and went completely dark. The officers were now relying only on their flashlights. When Raoul aimed his light back down the stairs, the figure was gone. The first floor looked completely empty again. Both officers slowly retreated down the hallway toward the staircase, their breathing now clearly audible on the body camera audio. As they reached the top step, another sound echoed through the house, this time coming from behind them in the photo room. It was the sound of something heavy dragging slowly across the wooden floor. Mark turned his light back toward the room. The photographs on the walls were now falling one by one, fluttering to the floor like leaves. But no one was inside the room. As the final photo dropped, Raoul noticed something that made his blood run cold. The newest photograph, the one showing them inside the house, had changed. Now it showed 3 figures standing in the living room. The third figure in the photograph stood directly behind them, taller than both officers. Raoul grabbed Mark's arm and pulled him toward the staircase. They quickly descended to the first floor, determined to leave the house immediately. But when they reached the living room, they noticed the front door was no longer where it had been. Instead of the doorway leading outside, there was now only a solid wall covered with old peeling wallpaper. Mark checked the windows, but each one had been boarded shut from the outside. Panic began to set in as they realized the layout of the house itself seemed to be changing. Rooms they had previously walked through were now completely different. The kitchen doorway led to a narrow hallway that hadn't existed before. Raoul tried smashing a window with his baton, but the glass didn't even crack. Meanwhile, the whispering sound had returned, only now it echoed from every direction at once. The voice was no longer repeating, "He's still here." Now it was saying something else entirely. The whisper slowly formed a new sentence that echoed through the halls. "Now you are too." The officers ran through the house searching for another exit, but every door led back to the same living room. It was as if the house had become a maze that constantly reset itself. Their body cameras captured doors opening into rooms that shouldn't physically fit inside the structure according to the building plans. One room contained hundreds of old cassette tapes stacked from floor to ceiling. Another contained children's toys scattered across the ground, even though the farmhouse owners never had children. As the officers tried to stay calm, Mark suddenly noticed something disturbing about the dust covering the floor. Fresh footprints were forming behind them with every step they took. But they weren't their footprints. The marks were longer and thinner, stretching unnaturally across the floorboards as if something tall was walking directly behind them. Just in time to see the wooden ceiling bulging downward, as if something massive was pressing its weight directly above them. The camera captured one final disturbing detail before the feed cut out completely. 2 long, pale fingers slowly pushed through the ceiling boards, stretching down toward the officers like someone reaching through thin ice. Backup officers arrived at the farmhouse roughly 20 minutes later after losing contact with Mark and Raoul. The property appeared completely empty. The front door was open exactly as it had been before. Inside, the house looked abandoned and untouched, covered in thick layers of dust. No footprints were found anywhere in the building. The rotary phone upstairs was gone, and there were no photographs on the walls. Most disturbingly, The body camera recordings recovered from the officer's patrol car only contained the first few minutes of footage from when they entered the house. Everything after that point had been completely erased. Mark Jensen and Raul Ortega were never found. The farmhouse was demolished the following year, but construction workers later claimed something strange happened during the demolition. Every time they tried tearing down the second-floor hallway, their tools would mysteriously disappear overnight. Eventually, the entire site was sealed off and left abandoned. Locals still claim that on quiet nights, faint whispers can be heard coming from the empty field where the farmhouse once stood.